Ever since I was little, I believed in the paranormal, and every once in a while, I'd have an encounter. My house isn't new, about 50 years to be exact, and I've lived here almost my entire life, and to our knowledge, no one has died here. I think one of the occurrences I kept on having when I was little was waking up in the middle of the night, and running into my mom's room, and eventually going to sleep in her bed. I've never had paralysis, and I could move every time. But when I looked out her doorway, on the frame would be a tall, thin figure. When I looked away and back, it would get closer and then retreat. I've tried to debunk this in the daytime, and it wasn't there. I thought maybe it was the darkness, but I didn't know it looked too human-like. I think it could be debunked. My parents just don't really like hearing about the scary stuff. It freaks them out, and especially because this took place in their room multiple times. I don't think they want to hear it. Dolls. At 13, I was a very paranoid person, and one night I woke up around 2. I want to say still delirious. I could hear a woman's voice talking to me. She had a soothing presence and was calming me back to sleep. She whispered, "Are you there?" Or, "Are you awake?" I drowsily responded with a yes, and felt a wave of warmth and soft comfort wash over me, and slept soundly the rest of the night with no nightmares. Nothing scary, just peace. It was kind of odd, but very nice to hear. Funny how my brain didn't register that it was a spirit. Usually I get crazy scared or excited for this stuff. A month before the incident, I went to Goodwill and got a Victorian-looking doll which I bought on impulse, hoping it had a spirit. My friends dubbed her named the Pink Lady, hence her very pink long dress. Everything was alright, but at night I always felt like she was looking directly at me, no matter where I stood in the room. I could feel a sense of hatred for me. She hated the music I would put on and would definitely make me feel ill, paranoid, etc. But one day, funny enough, this old jazz 40s or at least 50s song turned on, and I no longer felt watched. She stopped looking at me, and I could finally look at her and hold her without being creeped out. She even seemed like a friend. She got upset when I was crying and hated to see people hurt me. Recently, she's been not so active. Maybe because I'm not so scared anymore, or she dislikes where she is in my room. She always expressed to me that she loved sitting on my dresser. During the summer, I got a pendulum, and when I used it to talk to, hopefully other spirits because of many occurrences. First the Pink Lady came on, and then someone else. Whenever I would use it after the day, the second person would always come in and pretend to be her. I could tell her it was how it was moved that it wasn't her. She was always so excited to talk to me, but this person was dull and felt sad. I've tried to get their name and at least gender. I asked, "Are you a man?" "No." "Are you a girl?" "No." I've tried to go through the entire alphabet to at least get a first name, but they wouldn't answer. "Does your name start with A?" "No." Skip to E. "Does your name start with E?" No answer. I asked where they like to reside. "Are you mainly in my room?" "No." "What about the bathroom?" No answer, but a slight yes. My friend has spirits in his house, and there's an evil presence that blocks everyone else from talking on his spirit box. Maybe this is the same scenario. Maybe there's someone bad in the house blocking her from speaking. I'm not sure. I'll take any advice. The conversation. Am I talking to the Pink Lady? No. Can I talk to her? No. Are you a man? Yes. Are you new? No. Have you been here a long time? No. Did you follow me? Slight movement to yes. Did you follow me from a friend's house? Yes. Are you an adult? Huge swing towards no. Are you a kid like me? No. Are you an elder? No. Are you even human? No answer, but slight no. Are you evil? No. Are you good? No. Asking where he likes to reside. Do you like being in my sister's room? Are you mainly there? No. My parents' offices? No. My room? No. The kitchen? Slight yes. The family room? Our kitchen is in the same room as the family room. Yes. Can you move on? Yes. Do you want to move on? No. Did you follow me a year ago? Slight yes. Of course, I thanked him for his time and said goodbye. Recently, I've been feeling extremely sad at night time, and that could be him. I'm guessing since a lot of bad spirits feed off negativity, maybe he's giving that to me. I've never felt this way the night before, and it started after I talked to him for the first time. I'm not sure if he's a liar trying to scare me, and I get the feeling he's a trickster because of the awful dreams I get each night. Weird, vivid, scary dreams. I'm a bit scared there's an entity attached to me. I recently got incense and I burn it a lot for my deities, and those are the nights I don't get sad. I'm Wiccan/pagan, and I think I might need to make a protection spell. I'm very sure on what to do next. Sage might help, along with smudging my house. Since you won't tell me your name, I'll give you one. Yes. Do you want me to call you Isaiah? No. Mark? No. Miles? Strong yes. So now I've dubbed him Miles. I was talking to my friend that I mentioned in previously, and he said he might be shy and scared to open up. Are you shy? Kinda. Do you have a lot of mental health issues? Strong yes. Oh, same. I have OCD and ADHD, along with anxiety. Do you have anxiety? Kinda. PTSD? I couldn't think of anything else. Kinda. Do you have a motive? No. Are you a demon? No. Are you human? No. Are you lying? I think you're lying. No response. Are you attached to this house? No. Are you attached to a person? Yes. Is it me? Yes. Do you follow me because you're scared? No answer. Or are you lonely? No answer. Are you scared to tell me anything? Yes. Do you have trust issues? Slight yes. I still feel like he's lying to me a bit. Scared to tell me anything, which is a bit disappointing. I came into today's session with that in mind, and I don't feel as paranoid. I don't feel scared at all, actually. I think it's because I comforted him, or started off before asking questions saying who I am and what the pendulum does. Who knows if this spirit just wants to follow me? My youngest brother is 13 years younger than me. We used to play hide and seek all the time when he was between 2 and 3 years old. I stopped after a weird experience occurred back in 1999. I was always a nerdy girl and even enjoyed doing homework after school at our dining room table. Every evening, my little brother Eddie would come running from someplace in the house and say, "Come find me," and then proceed to hide in the same spot every time. That spot was in the living room, behind one of those big, old-school floor speakers. The living room and dining room are separated by a wall, so I'd have to walk around it and towards the corner of the living room to find Eddie. I would look around asking, I wonder where Eddie could be. He's hiding so well. And then I'd jump and yell, "Found you!" He'd squeal with delight and run away while I chased him to wherever my parents were to save him. Then I'd go back to doing homework. Well, except for that last time. I was sitting doing homework as usual, and Eddie came running up to me. He didn't say anything, but I knew what he wanted. I said, "Oh no, Eddie is too good at hiding. I don't know if I'll be able to find him this time." I watched him take off around the wall, and I gave him a minute to hide. I put down my pencil and began the routine. I jumped in front of the spot, but the words I was about to utter caught in my throat. The spot was empty. At that moment I heard Eddie's giggling coming from my parents' room on the other side of the house. There's no way he could have made it down the hall without me seeing or hearing his footsteps reverberate off the marble flooring. I went over and tried to open my parents' bedroom door, but it was locked. I knocked and waited. My mother opened up a few seconds later, and I asked why I looked so confused. I asked her if Eddie had just been out in the living room, and she said no, that he'd been with her in the room for some time. I felt like a lead weight dropped into the pit of my stomach. I didn't explain anything to my mum at that point. I just asked if I could finish my homework in her room. Eddie didn't act any different, but I refused to play hide and seek with him anymore. Recently, it happened again, sort of. Now, I'm 37, with 2 kids of my own. My 7-year-old daughter likes to hide whenever we're visiting Grandma and Grandpa at that same house. The speakers are gone, and she does change up her hiding spots. However, the area where Eddie's hiding spot was still works. The difference is now there's a couch to hide behind instead. About a week ago, I walked into my parents' house to pick my daughter up after a visitation with her father. My parents were in their bedroom, but I have a key, so I let myself in. I assumed she was already there, so when I heard a noise coming from the living room, I figured it was just her hiding again. I walked quietly to the living room, toward the couch, and was about to jump and scare her when I heard the front door open. In comes my daughter, all smiles, running to hug me. I looked over, and there was no one behind the couch. Definitely didn't mention it to her or anyone until now. What the heck is going on? I remember once, just once, something eerie happened with that stereo. It was your typical late 80s, early 90s kid, always waiting for my favourite songs to come on the radio, so I could press the record button on the tape deck to create epic mixtapes. One Saturday or Sunday afternoon in 1999 or 2000, when I was 16 or 17, my brother Rene, middle sibling who's 3 years younger, and I were vibrating to some jams on the radio in the living room, when all of a sudden a burst of strange static exploded from the speakers of the stereo. No words, just warbling static. Our first reaction was fear, not of something paranormal, but of our parents, because we knew the loud noise would land us in a world of pain. We both ran to the stereo and tried the knob to turn down the volume, but it didn't change anything. Then we tried to turn the system off completely. Still nothing. We knew we were about to get some smacks if we didn't shut it off, so naturally I went to pull the plug. Still no change. Rene and I looked at each other and slowly backed away from the stereo, covering our ears. Our father came to see why we had the sound up so loud, and he looked at us as we stood there, eyes wide, fear etched on our faces. He went from looking annoyed to confused, as the static gradually dissipated to nothing. I wanted to cry, but held it together for my brow. We never really talked about it. It must have been residual current in the wires or something that kept it going even after we unplugged the system. It had to have been, right? I never touched that stereo again, but it worked fine for everyone else until we replaced it with something with more high tech. I ended up using my wood-panelled alarm clock to listen to music from then on, until that got weird too. So many things are coming back to me after all these years. This particular experience happened around 1999. I was about 16 and had finally gotten my own room the previous year. My room, my parents' bedroom and the guest bathroom are all on one side of the house, down a long corridor. Parents on the left, me on the right facing their door, and the bathroom in the middle. At the end of the hall, you have the front door on the left and my brother's room on the right. The hallway opens up to the dining room on the left, with the living room on the right. There's a sliding glass door on the furthest right wall that leads to the backyard. If you continue through the dining room, you hit the kitchen, which takes up the whole end of the house, including a hallway to the right and a door that also leads to the backyard. Okay, now that you have the layout has been established, I can get to the spooky parts. As much as I've always loved scary stories, books and movies, I'm a big scaredy cat when it comes to the dark. I don't like not being able to see what might be lurking in the shadows. I never feel truly alone in the dark. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and was in dire need of some water. I was super tired from some sporting event I'd participated in the previous afternoon, and was practically still half asleep as I walked down the hall to the kitchen. The dark was the furthest thing from my mind. I passed by the living room and glanced into the dark. I saw what I thought was my brother Rene, 3 years younger than me, sitting on the couch. His silhouette against the light of the moon coming in through the slats of the blinds on the sliding glass door. My initial thought was, what a weirdo, as I continued to the kitchen. I got my glass of refreshing water and downed it right then and there. My mother hated dishes in the bedrooms. I placed my glass in the sink to wash later and made my way back through the dark house. I remembered that Rene had been sitting in the living room, so I decided to check on him. Maybe he was having trouble sleeping, or something could be bothering him. I walked toward the living room and was about to ask him what he was up to, but he was no longer there. I looked around and didn't see him anywhere, so I figured he had gone back to bed. Odd that I hadn't heard him, though. The floors in that house always complain, and still do, whenever anyone walks around. Didn't hear his door open or close either. I chalked it up to me being tired and went back to sleep. In the morning, during breakfast, I asked Rennie what he'd been doing in the living room around 3 a.m. He looked at me like I was crazy. He hadn't left his room all night. I told him what I had seen, and he said he'd seen something similar before. I only saw that shadow once. I never went near the living room at night anymore. I'd bring a glass of water to bed. Mother's wrath be damned. This happened about 15 minutes ago. I'm sitting in my room after my school has finished, and I'm getting ready to go with my parents to their job, where I also work. I hear my parents' door across mine open, and I think my dad is coming through to get his shoes from downstairs. But I hear both my parents downstairs. I look up and see the door just opening at a gradual speed, like I couldn't recreate that natural movement if I wanted to. I very cautiously walked over and tested to see if I was insane. I tried to check to see if the AC was on, because it causes air to rush into the stairs area, which causes the doors to gently close. The only problem, it closes doors, but only a little bit at a time. This door opened inward into my parents' room, and the AC wasn't even on. The objects around my parents' room could not have opened the door and were all at rest. My dog was downstairs, and my cat was under my bed as usual when the door opened, so there's no way they could have caused it. Sometimes that specific door gets shut incorrectly and springs back open a little because the thing that pushes back to wedge in the doorway doesn't get pushed into the wedge or hole. I tried to recreate it, but no matter what position I had the door, no matter how close I had the door to completely closed, even when I pushed it to give it a head start, it didn't open all the way, only a few inches. Parents believe that it happened, but don't believe it to be a ghost. We live in a house that was built when we moved here, Round Rock, Texas. There are hundreds of other houses around us, so what are the damn odds that we got chosen after 17 years for something to happen? Am I insane, or is there something happening here? I'm going off to college in a few months, and I don't want to lose my damn mind every night going to sleep, in fear of something that may or may not exist. About 10 years ago, when I was 20, I was living at home with my parents. We had a cat named Lily. She was mostly black and tan, and she was impossibly affectionate, sweeter than most dogs I'd met. Lily and I were closer than I can explain. She was barely 4 years old. One day, I came upstairs in a rush, late for class at my local community college. As I went to pet Lily, who appeared to be sleeping on a favourite chair, she was stiff to the touch, and my heart sank instantly. I broke down crying, called my folks at work immediately, and told them Lily was dead. They came home right away, and we were all devastated. This was so unfair. She was such a cared-for cat who got all the attention in the world. Always had her shots, checkups, etc. Just a freak occurrence that blindsided us. We sat in the living room crying together for hours until our heads hurt. When she was alive, Lily had a habit of finding a way to get her collar off. We always found it and put it back on her, but it was almost like our little game. She'd slip out of it, and we'd have to find it under a couch, chair or bed, and put it back on her. It was important she wore her collar because she was an indoor cat, and it had her rabies vaccination tag and our contact info if she ever got out. The sound of the two tags clinking together had a very distinct sound, different from any collars or tags of any other pets we've had in my life. But when I discovered her body, I noticed her collar wasn't on. Over the next few days, we searched the house high and low, and my mom kept an immaculately clean house. Every piece of furniture was upended, every mattress, box spring, armoire, dresser and appliance searched. I suppose it wasn't necessary, but we wanted a little closure, and it eventually became a search for our own peace of mind, because we felt crazy for not being able to find it. A number of days or weeks went by, and though it was too strange to just outright accept, we had no other choice, and finally just gave up on searching for the collar and decided it would turn up on its own. Within a few days of calling off the search, I was awakened one night very abruptly. It was the jingle of Lily's collar. I was wide awake listening for more, and I got it. I could hear her very clearly, and I was as awake as could be. We had no other pets at the time, and for a split second I almost shot out of bed to see if she was outside of my room. But I knew instantly that was impossible. I was strangely at peace with it right then though. I knew I wouldn't be able to hold or pet her, but the sound lasted several seconds and was very loud and clear. There is zero question in my mind what that noise was. In the morning, I went out into the family room, looking for the collar since I knew I'd heard it. No luck. I heard it a few more times after that, probably 6 or 7 in total. Most at night, but sometimes in the day. Always upstairs when I was downstairs, or vice versa if it was daytime. Some jingles came months apart, some came within a couple of nights of each other, but they were all very loud, clear, and definitely her. I never chased the sound because I was afraid it would lead to inevitable disappointments. I accepted that this was her, coming to comfort me the only way she could. The house was sold a couple of years ago, and to this day, Lily's collar is yet to be found. So this happened around 4 years ago, and I'm curious if this is actually a thing that can happen, or if it was a massive coincidence. I experience sleep paralysis from time to time, but not very often. And when I have, it's only a brief episode once in the night, for example. However, this was different. I was sleeping with my boyfriend at the time's place, who has never experienced sleep paralysis before, FYI, and was having a rough night's sleep. I was in and out of sleep paralysis literally all night. Never experienced multiple episodes in one night before, but literally as soon as I'd ridden the wave and woke up from one episode, I'd slip back off to sleep, straight into sleep paralysis again. I can't really remember what the sleep paralysis was, but it was nothing really specific. Just general not being able to move, seeing things move around the room, and seeing figures in the room. I also remember a hue of khaki green around the room. So I woke up exhausted. It really took it out of me. And the first thing I did when I woke up was sit up and say to my boyfriend how much of a terrible night I'd had, and then I was in and out of sleep paralysis the whole night, and I'd never experienced anything like that before. He replied saying he'd also been in and out of sleep paralysis all night. Remember, he'd never had it before. Again, nothing specific for him, just the same sort of experience as me. Was it a coincidence, despite him never experienced sleep paralysis before? I just found it was so continuous all night, which I'd never had before, and same for him. I lived in a house that was connected originally to a big mental hospital in northwest England. Our house was also next door but connected together, semi-detached. We owned a field at the back and went around to the side of the next door and a big field to the front of our house. This field was used for cows and later houses. Behind our field was the farm. The houses were built in 1900, and they were the pigman's house, ours, and the herdsman's house next door. When we moved into the house, it had been lived in for 30 to 20 years. We moved into the house in 93, 94. The front door was nailed and boarded up, relevant to the story. The only door that was accessible was the back door. It had a surrounding yard with a door into the back and side garden. The house was a mess and needed a lot of work. First night I stayed there, I was about 13 or 14 at the time with my nan, as we were asked if we could let someone come round to try and sort out electricity and water. That night, we heard footsteps and banging. We put this down to being old and no carpets and imagination. When we finally got electric, I went to my bedroom, and as soon as I opened the door, the lights started to spin, and then stopped, and the light bulb dropped out and it was hot. Things became more weird when we started working on the house. Things would move, and you saw what looked like someone walking around the house and on the grounds. One day, we started to knock down an old brick flue that went on an old boiler. That night, I was woken up dead at 1 a.m. to the sound of hammering on the wall in the kitchen. It did also wake next door. I went downstairs and had to put the light on to see. The lump hammer stood upright on the worktop and no one in the kitchen. Off I went back to bed. This again woke the house up to more banging at both 2 and 3 a.m. Other people went down, both my nan and my mum went down again, and no one was there. When we started to clear the field up, we came across a lot of sandstone blocks, some really big blocks. We ended up uncovering a house. This house was the original farmhouse. It was built in the 1600s and pulled down in the 1920s or 30s. Again, more stuff happened. My stepdad went out to his car one night to get some files out, and he came running in. He was really shaken up. He said he had seen a woman who was old. She had walked up the driveway about 50 yards, and he had his back turned to her as he thought it was my mum. He turned around and faced her. She was wearing a hood over her head, and looked at him, bringing her head up, and disappeared in front of him. This was the first, and not the last, he and we saw of her. We would sometimes have the electric switch off at the mains. Nothing tripped, or electrical appliances switch on. Mainly TVs, and the sound turned right up. This happened to me after coming home one night from work. Sat down for an hour, and as I got to the stairs, the TV came on and went to max volume. One day, this I think was 94 or 95, 2 women came to the house. This was something very strange. The house was set right back of the road, and the house was at the time a very quiet lane. One of them was from Geneva and came to visit her friend and sister and decided to come and see where she grew up and visit her granddad and nan's house. This was their house. She was shocked we had a new front door and that it was no longer boarded up. This is where things clicked. She stated her granddad kept the door shut and nailed because of her visitor. She would disappear behind him, in mirrors, or if he was walking around, just appear in front of him. She stated he did this to stop her coming into the house. We believe she lived in the old farmhouse. I myself saw her over the years, and so did other people. A friend of mine saw her when he was sitting on the fence on the driveway one night. I was going to my mum's and I told him I would pick him up from there. He walked from work as it was just down the road. When I got there, he refused to go into the house and wanted to go home. He was white. I thought he was ill. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He said he saw an old lady walk along the trees on the side of the driveway. Some mist rolled along behind her, and when he called out to her, she stopped, looked at him, and proceeded to walk through the last tree and disappeared. I told him he just met the visitor, and she was harmless and must have been grumpy. It was her thing that she didn't like grumpy or angry people, and would show herself if you were. More things happened over the years, and not just with our house. I came home and I got to the gate. The gate to the field in front of the house slammed shut. It was not being used, and the farmer had been putting the new fence up. When I got to the next door, I could feel someone watching me. This was about 2 a.m. As I looked at their house, I saw a man in the window. He was wearing a bowler hat and waistcoat with a chained pocket watch. He was just staring out of the window. That did freak me out, and I ran into the house. Our dog would almost every night go out into the front garden, or even into the field and just start barking. No one was ever in the field, but we did learn that Oliver Cromwell's men stayed in the field before the big Battle of Winwick, 1648. The history, and also the fact that a Roman road that went through that field and across the road where the drive started, must have seen some stuff over the centuries. If you're familiar with US ghost hunting spots, you might have heard of the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona. It's been open since 1902, and has been the subject of multiple paranormal investigations and shows. And there are supposedly 3 documented ghosts that inhabit it. That of a drowned child, a man in a top hat, and a forlorn prostitute. My boyfriend Coop and I decided on Saturday morning that we would take a trip to make up for a missed birthday. We'd never gone on a real trip together, so we didn't plan it well/at all. We just realised we were about 1.5 hours from Bisbee and decided to book a hotel once we got there. We chose the Copper Queen because it's the most prominent hotel in the area, and it's right in the middle of everything. We weren't aware of its reputation as a paranormal hotspot. The room itself was old-looking, as to be expected with a hotel that old. Yellowing wallpaper, splintering wood floors, dim lighting. The locks on the door were pretty flimsy, and you had to actively yank it shut, or it would fall open again. We joked that it looked like the Tower of Terror. After a day of walking around, we came back to get changed. We heard a creaking noise, and I had Coop check under the bed, only half seriously, but I was still relieved that nobody was there. We grabbed a lighter and went out for a smoke, then came back, showered, watched TV for a little, and then turned out the lights. The moment we shut out the lights, there was a variety of clicks, creaks, and pops in odd patterns. It being an old room, and us being a logical couple, we figured it was the old fan or the wall-mounted AC. I was listening to the noises when I felt Coop freeze up next to me. "Is that you?" I responded, "No, that was the AC." "No, that. Seriously, is that you?" He asked what he meant, and waited for a minute or so before asking again and again. Finally, he answered, "I was trying to listen. Babe, I hear someone breathing." We reasoned that it was the room next door and settled back into our pillows. And then I remembered. There wasn't another room on that side. Our room was the first on the landing, and the side we were closest to, the side Coop would have been able to hear, if at all, was the main staircase. Coop, being 21 years old, the boy is blessed with the ability to fall asleep within seconds. I could hear him snoring and his legs were over mine, but I was too anxious to sleep. I then felt the lightest tap on the top of the quilt, just next to my feet. I froze, but tried to reason to myself that Coop had twitched in his sleep, although his legs were still on top of mine. A few moments passed and I thought I'd imagined it, and then I felt a pinch and a tugging motion at the same area of the quilt. I woke Coop and demanded he checked under the bed. I was still reasoning that there was a non-supernatural explanation for the events, and it occurred to me that although we had checked before leaving for our walk, we hadn't checked after. The flimsy lock and the fact that the door was difficult to close made it seem likely that someone could have snuck in. Coop was too groggy to be useful, so I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, and leapt as far from the bed as I could while crouching to check what was under it. Nothing. We were both a little freaked by this point and agreed to turn on the TV. Back on to drown out any weird noises. We turned on Futurama and settled back into bed for the 3rd time. Again, Coop fell asleep within seconds. I was drifting off when I heard the audio on the TV. Cut somehow. It suddenly shifted tone to where it sounded like a grainy VHS instead of a streaming adult cartoon. I heard a woman saying something about a phantom, and then a blood-curdling scream from the TV. At this point, I was too scared to open my eyes, so I steadied my breathing and pretended to be asleep. That's the last event I could recall, and upon checking out the next day, the manager asked if we had experienced anything. That's when we googled the hotel and found out about its history of hauntings. So there it is. Nothing too crazy, but I've definitely never experienced anything like that before, and don't have an explanation besides the supernatural. When I was a teenager, a guy who everyone knew or knew of in my hometown died in a car accident. The car accident was the weirdest one I've ever heard of in my life. The driver was a well-known young man who was someone I'd call a beautiful soul. He was always kind and gentle to everyone and hugged everyone as much as possible. The day he died, it felt like there was suddenly a huge void in my hometown. To this day, I'm sad that this man has gone from the world. The car accident happened during the day on a sunny, warm day. He was driving the correct speed limit and was driving north out of town. He hadn't been drinking or doing drugs of any kind. He had 2 friends in the car with him, one in the passenger seats and one in the back. The friends stated they have no idea how it happened. All they knew was that he was driving and then suddenly the car flew off into a ditch and their friend was dead. The weirdest part was that he was the only one in the car who died. The other 2 passengers didn't even have a scratch. I went to his funeral and I've never in my life seen such an outpouring of love and support from a community over someone who died. The church was completely full on the main floor and the basement was completely full. Mourners were spilling out onto the sidewalk of this church and there were still more people showing up. I still to this day cannot fathom how this man died like he did. The other weird thing was I went to leave flowers on his grave twice. The first time his grave was to the right and about 4 feet from a concrete drainage ditch, but the second time I went, I couldn't find it. So I asked at the office for the cemetery and was told, oh, it's over there, and they acted like it had always been there. The second location was to the left and 3 gravestones over from the first location his grave was. I've never went back because I couldn't handle it if the grave was in yet another place. For 13 years, I was a member of an amateur dramatics group. They had their own theatre that was built sometime in the 50s. It was built from a barn that was converted into tennis courts. Beneath the flooring, it still has the tennis courts. For a long time, members would tell me that the theatre was haunted, but they'd never share their stories. It's only recently that I've been having my own experiences there. I was there one day helping to build the set for the next production. It was just myself and another member. We would stay the whole day, listen to music through the system and work. He left to go to the shop, whilst I continued painting the flat. A few moments after he left, the music began to skip, old scratched CDs, and then cut out entirely. I wasn't bothered by this. His music taste wasn't to my liking anyway. Then I heard footsteps walking towards me on the other side of the flat that I was painting. The flooring at the back of the stage bounces when stepped on. I felt every step. The footsteps stopped when it got to me. I slowly put my paintbrush down and poked my head around the corner. I didn't see anything. Decided to stand outside and have a cigarette until the other member got back. Whilst outside, I heard a crash coming from inside the building. It sounded like a plank of wood falling. Reluctantly, I went back in to check on everything, and nothing was out of place. It was then that the music started up again. They found me outside chain smoking, roughly an hour afterwards. Another occasion I have, same situation. Me and another member are building the set, with only 2 people in the building. We'd just applied a coat of paint and are sitting, literally watching the paint dry. We heard a bit of wood move at the back left of the stage, and footsteps walk from left to right. It sounded as though they were dragging the wood along the floor behind them. They walked to the side of the stage and then disappeared. For someone to have entered the theatre and got to that section of the stage, they would have had to have come in through the door that myself and other members were sitting beside. We had been there all day, and there was no way someone could have hidden until then. One evening, we were rehearsing late. There were 4 actors, myself included, a lighting technician, and the director in the theatre. I feel I must say that only myself and the director were regular members of the theatre. The others were brought in, and this was their first rehearsal with us, hence the long hours. We were starting the scene with a complete blackout. However, one of the actors kept messing about, and we had to keep restarting the scene. I was seated stage right, facing stage left. Running along the back of the stage was a thick gauze curtain. The lights went off, but the curtain stayed lit up. I turned to see what it was, and realised it was the emergency exit sign behind the curtain. Normally, there's another dark curtain behind this one. As I looked, I noticed the silhouette of a lady in a dress on the curtain. The shadow was blurred and bigger than it should have been. I figured it must have been closer to the light source than the curtain. I told everyone to stay where they were, told the lighting technician to leave the lights off, and I went to investigate. The light was on a beam at least 10 feet above the stage. There were no walkways, and no way anyone could make shadow puppets in front of it. When I took my place back on the stage, I realised that the silhouette had gone. I turned to the director, who was staring at the curtain, and whispered, "Did you see that?" He nodded. I packed my things away and noped right out of there. I'm 23 now. This happened and started when I was 3 or 4. Everything that happened that night, I remember like it happened yesterday. The memory's so vivid and forever in my mind. The second floor of my house at the time was really just a small landing, with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom off of it. Immediately the top to your right was my bedroom, the bathroom adjacent to the stairs, then my sister's bedroom and my parents' bedroom. My mum would put my sister and I to bed at 7 o'clock every night. I always had issues falling asleep as a kid, but would eventually drift off. My bedroom had a closet next to the door, and next to that, 2 windows with a dresser sitting between them, with my bed pushed against the wall, at the foot end of the bed near the door. One night, not unlike any other, we're put to bed and I finally find sleep, after a few hours of just laying there, only to wake again some hours later. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning. I rolled over to scan my room. I've always been afraid of the dark, so the room was lit up by a nightlight plugged in at the end of my bed. Standing in front of the window furthest from me near the closet, I saw what I thought at the time was an angel. Quite literally glittering gold in front of my eyes, standing at least 7 feet tall, staring out the window. My movement must have grabbed its attention because immediately its head turned to look at me. There were no facial features except for a strong defined jawline. Though faceless, it wasn't like a freaky faceless. At this point, I was more curious than afraid. Then it started to yell at me. It kept telling me to shut up, shut up. The yelling quickly turned to screaming and I freaked. I was one giant goosebump and I got up from bed, opened my door and looked into the lit hallway. My parents always left that light on at night in case my sister and I needed something or got scared in the middle of the night. Almost in slow motion, I noticed the air felt too still. Something was off. Before I could process anything, I took one step toward and out of the bathroom and shot this thing. It gets right in front of my face, screaming a blood-curdling scream that still echoes in my ears to this day. The face of this thing was just grey and sinister, eyes completely blacked out, skin cracked, no lips. Just a black, hollow hole with the screams coming from it. Long black hair flying around as if there was a fan behind it. I fucking lost it. I screamed so loud I could swear the entire house shook. I barged into my parents' room, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My mum looked scared and confused. My dad just terrified. I don't remember what happened after that. I'm sure I told my parents what happened and ended up sleeping with them for the next few weeks. Growing up, I asked my mum about that night and she explained how I barged in, crying, rambling off some story about an angel or something. Today, I don't know what the fuck I saw. My dad, on the other hand, never said much about it and instead started warning me to stay away from Ouija boards and told some freaky stories about stuff that happened to him. As my parents divorced, growing up things got worse with respect to what I was being exposed to. My dad would show me scary pop-up videos and play creepy music. I was 6 or 7 at this time. Safe to say, I hated going to my dad's because I thought whatever to me that night was somehow connected to him. Eventually, my mum remarried. We moved and things were okay. Then I decided to stop seeing my dad completely, for more unrelated reasons. I was 9 years old at this time. That's when things started again. The air was ridiculously heavy all the time. I hated sleeping in my room. I always felt like there was something at the end of my bed just watching me. I tried to ignore it for 9 years, constantly living in fear. We moved out of that house to somewhere around the corner once my mum and stepdad divorced. That way, we wouldn't have to switch schools. I was about to graduate high school, and my sister still had 1 more year. I still had access to the old house, as my ex-stepdad still lived there. They were using my old bedroom for storage and always kept the blinds closed, as had I when living there. One morning, when everyone in my old house was at work, my friend and I decided to sesh in the garage quickly. We had the okay from my ex-stepdad to do this, as long as we weren't driving anywhere afterward, obviously. We walked through the front door, through the foyer to the garage, and got settled. I could already feel the extra 10 pounds on my chest, and I really wanted to make this quick. I had previously spoken with my friend about what I was feeling in this house, as we had been friends for years at this point, but never gave him much context. What happened when I was a kid? Not even 5 minutes into our sesh, we heard the footsteps. Above the garage is my old bedroom. My entire body went cold. My friend immediately looked at me. We waited another second and heard them again. This time, like a stomp type running around the room. We said fuck it, packed up and got the hell out. I locked up and walked down the driveway completely freaked, trying to push the 1,000 thoughts running through my mind out of my head. Then my friend let out a tiny shriek. I turned back and immediately asked her what's wrong. They were doing some work. I thought she would have stepped on a rogue nail. Horror was written across her face, and I looked up at the window, but the blinds were closed. I asked her again what was up. She said for whatever reason, she felt like she needed to look up at my old bedroom window. She said the blinds were open and in the window, looking down on us, was, and I quote her words, this thing. It had black hair, black eyes, cracked skin, and just a hollow black hole for a mouth. What the fuck? She said this so fast, terror oozing out of every word she was saying, and then she burst into tears. So did I. I was too freaked to tell her what happened when I was a kid, and I didn't want to freak her out more. I suggested that we get the hell out of there. Since then, nothing's happened. I recently travelled to Rome, specifically the Vatican, and got a blessed St. Michael pendant for extra measure, seeing as whatever it was followed me in silence throughout the years. The thing hasn't bothered me, other than showing up in a very specific nightmare I've had every 8 to 10 years since my first experience. If this thing is still on my tail, I'll be due for a nightmare within the next year. My grandpa passed away 10 years ago from complications with COVID and pneumonia. He was 67 and very healthy, and we were extremely close. Now, most of these strange coincidences, take them as you want, but personally, I feel they're from him. I'm going to go in order. The night he passed, I was obviously very devastated. Me and my boyfriend were laying in bed and had a candle lit next to us on the end table. And every time I said pappy in a sentence, as that's how I referred to him, I thought the flame on the candle was moving, and so I mentioned it to my boyfriend, and we both looked over, and the flame was completely still. I said, pappy? And the flame started wiggling like crazy. We tested after and tried to blow in the direction from where we were laying. Shook the bed, and nothing was moving that flame. So that was interesting. This has happened 2 more times since. My grandma told me that when red cardinals are here, angels are near. And for reference, I've lived in the apartment I live in since November, and have never seen a red cardinal outside, and now I've seen them like crazy. I've also frequently looked out the windows while I listen to music and talk on the phone, which is a lot. One day, I was just seeing a ton of red birds, and I told my boyfriend I think they're from my grandpa, and he was debating with me if it was. Well, my grandpa was big into motorcycles, and I've never heard a motorcycle in this apartment complex before, and as we were debating, we heard a motorcycle pull in one of the streets right outside our balcony, where I was seeing the birds. Another weird coincidence. This one is just but almost every time I'm crying and talking about him, I look at the clock and it's like 5:55 or 12:12, like a sequence of numbers, and I think it's just weird. This was 2019 October, right before the pandemic hit. I had recently started a new job, but the office was 3 hours away from my home. So my friend sublet his studio apartment to me just 40 minutes away from my office. I planned to stay in the studio 3 days a week and would commute to my other home with my husband the rest of the days. Very tiring. So this studio was locked for almost a year at this point. Hence I cleaned it every evening till midnight after coming back from the office. The first week was very exhausting and dirty, so I paid no attention to any oddities, but still would feel panic and anxiety as the night grew. By the end of the second week, the house was almost set, and this particular night I was done before midnight. So I finished dinner, lit a smoke, and sat on the couch facing the front door that was open. The studio was on the first floor, and between two other studios. Both of my neighbours used to work the night shift and lived alone. So as I'm puffing away, pondering on the day's events, a cardboard box full of books laid next to the door goes up an inch and drops right in front of my eyes. My logical side of the brain says maybe something was stuck under it, hence the box moved. So I decided to roll up a joint and observe if something else happens. As soon as I'm stoned and relaxed, I hear music, laughter, running and chatting in the apartment left to me. Now this is a Thursday night, so I peep to check if I missed someone walking past my door to my neighbours, and I see a dark end of the alley and no one home. I chalk it up to me being stoned and sit on the couch again. Now another 5 minutes pass, and the party gets louder, but the running is now from my left wall to the ceiling, and then to my right wall. And this goes on. By this point, it's 1:30 AM, and I have office the next morning, but I find no courage to go to bed as there's this heaviness inside the apartment. Panic and anxiety are all over me, but I don't see a reason for it. Just party noise, you see. Finally, I puff another joint, say out loud, "You want a party? Go ahead. I have an office. I'll sleep." Tired, scared, I passed out with the bathroom lights on. Next, I feel in the darkness someone sitting on me, a young guy. And right in front of the bathroom and to my right, a girl standing. You guessed it, sleep paralysis intensely. The guy is laughing and the girl is asking him to stop. I'm struggling to wake up, but when I give up struggling, I wake up to see the time to be 4:30 AM. At this point I jump, switch on all the lights, and call the friend who sublet his house, fully furnished. As he picks up, I say, "How do I get rid of the sleep paralysis?" I knew his history of sleep paralysis in the same house. He told me to find the iron dagger under the bed and place it under my pillow. I did and felt some peace, but no sleep. The next day, there was no sleep paralysis, but I felt them both lurking around the small studio with odd sounds of things moving, or lights flickering. I got so pissed as I was going through a lot with the commute, new office and reaching late and barely any sleep. I made a deal with them both. I sat down on the couch and openly spoke. "I understand this is your home, and you want me here. I don't want me here, so 3 days in the week I'll come and sleep here. Push me out 8 AM every day to the office, and you can have the house to yourselves." I finished my smoke, removed the dagger, and slept off. The next incident is of sleep paralysis, and I see someone pushing me from my bed to close the door, and the door shuts behind me loudly. The sound wakes me up, and I check the time, it's 8 AM. This dream went on for 2 months, and 8 AM sharp every day, without fail. Then the pandemic hit, and I came back home, vacating the studio. Sweet, mischievous couple they were. Thanks to them, I reached the office right on time for the next 2 months. Also, one night my husband tried to surprise me, and I did the same to him. We ended up in the opposite homes for the night. My husband is a skeptic, so I didn't tell him about the dagger to experiment if it was my head or not. They did the same to him, and he said he saw the guy sitting on him and the girl standing there. My dog was super scared and alert throughout. (2009 to 2010). When I met the woman who would later become my wife, we started renting a small house within the city limits. I was in the process of beginning a new job, and circumstances prevented me from staying in the house with her for the first week. Each morning, we'd talk on the phone during my drive to work. She explained to me each morning that she had struggled to sleep the previous night. She described sounds that were keeping her awake, i.e. someone running through the house, objects falling off the kitchen counter, doors slamming. After 3 days, I made arrangements to go ahead and move in with her. I was convinced that someone was breaking in and harassing her. She was convinced, however, that she was sharing the house with a ghost. I took off work the 3rd day. It took me about 8 hours to get everything moved in. I was taking a break on our bed, still fully dressed, when I felt something or someone tugging my pant leg. I remained motionless, hoping it would happen again. After a few seconds, it did happen again, much more aggressively this time. I felt a hand firmly placed on my leg, just before it grabbed my jeans and started pulling. She was on the bed next to me, and no one else was with us. We had no pets, as it wasn't allowed. I immediately started having the same experiences throughout the night, as she had described over the phone. It was like someone was destroying our kitchen, but nothing was ever out of place. There was running, as she described, which sounded like a smaller person, perhaps a child. I woke up one night to someone standing next to my bed. I heard giggling. Then the individual bolted out of the room as I turned my head. It was too dark to notice any features. Over the course of 8 months, many unusual things happened. To make a long story short, I'll skip ahead to my last experience and perhaps the most frightening. I was alone in the house, waiting to join an online seminar. I was sitting on my couch with my laptop on the coffee table ahead of me. I heard the back door slam shut, and a person began running quickly through the house. These footsteps were heavier, and this person was moving quickly. Given the design of our small house, this person was running in my direction. I shot up and ran out of the house. I didn't stop until I reached the street. That's where I remained until my wife returned. As I was standing by the street, I was looking back into the house. A balloon from a recent party made its way from the kitchen into my bedroom. Then back into the kitchen moments later. It felt like I was watching someone search for me, going room to room, all while holding this balloon. This was the last thing that happened to us. It stopped after that. We continued living there for another 4 years. I'd give anything to experience it again. I tried to be less afraid, and I'd approach the situation more analytically. My wife, on the other hand, was never afraid of it. Unfortunately, my wife passed away a few years ago. I know she would have enjoyed sharing her story here. I still drive by the house occasionally, and no one has ever moved in. I can't explain my experience in one sentence. Backstory. I met my fiancé about 9 years ago. His family is rather religious. His grandmother was a pastor. I've known his family a lot longer than him, which is how we met. I was used to the normal stuff when it comes to religion and faith. I grew up in the south. My family isn't that religious though. We go to church on Easter kind of thing, you know. About 3 years into our relationship, I wanted to get more serious about my faith and my relationship with God, so I was baptised. This, like a lot of young people I know, didn't stop me from doing what I wanted to do and fully embed myself in the book. Fast forward about 3 years later, we moved into a townhouse and my fiancé's grandmother became extremely sick. She's had health problems for years, but things came to a head. I was close with his grandmother. Anyone who crossed her path grew to love her. She had a very bright and stern spirit about her. She'd meet people and read them like a book without them saying a word. We were around almost every day in the last days, and she would say she could see things. People standing around her bed. A little boy would run under her bed and hide, and a man would visit her dressed in a gown with a cage on his head, holding a lantern. I had heard about people who were passing to be able to see others in the realm, but I was a skeptic. I believed in ghosts because I had a small experience I couldn't explain, but this was a little out of my mind. One day while at home, we received a phone call that Grandma was non-responsive, and her breathing was becoming shallow, so we rushed over. She was in her bed and the family was surrounding her praying. After about an hour, everyone out to get food and other things, trying not to miss her passing. Me and her granddaughter stayed with her to watch. As soon as everyone was out of the room, she took a final breath. I should tell you I've never witnessed anyone pass in my life. I wasn't scared, almost sad, but happy for her peace. I also feel like she waited until those who couldn't handle it were out of the room. We made sure we covered the mirrors, and that was it. About a week after the funeral, I felt strange. I would have dreams at first, vivid nightmares about shadows. Then I would see them while awake. Just glimpses, but I would catch them. I ignored them and thought it was just me. Then I'd have visions of his grandmother around the house taunting me, but her face would be evil and she'd never speak. Just peek around corners laughing at me. I myself started to feel strange. I'm a very empathetic person. If someone hurts, I hurt. But people would sob to me about really sad problems and I felt nothing. It was like a black hole in me. I told my boyfriend and he brushed it off. He was of course still grieving, so I didn't want to tell him how bad it was. I even got into a fist fight with a friend of mine who I've known since middle school. Me and this girl had never even had an argument. So not knowing what else to do, I turned to the Bible. Now I said my boyfriend is rather religious, so we kept an open Bible in almost every room in the house. I remember reading the book of Job one night and coming to him and questioning everything I was reading. I was questioning God. My boyfriend looked at me and said, "Let's go pray." The next part, I'll explain as much as I remember. We went downstairs to the living room. He grabbed the Bible, we stood in front of it. I believe he was in the book of Romans. He got to the part that says, "Jesus is my Lord and Saviour," and told me to repeat it. I couldn't. Like I physically couldn't. It was like something tied a rope to my tongue and was pulling on it. I looked at him and in a shaky voice I told him I can't. So he grabbed my arms and prayed harder. My arms where he was holding me were on fire. It felt like someone took a match to my arms. I started screaming and told him he was burning me, and I asked him to stop, but he kept going. That's when I blacked out. When I came to, I was on the floor in tears and throwing up. Then a black sort of cloud came out of my mouth. It formed a shape of a figure, and my boyfriend opened the door and told it to get out. It basically flew out the door. I watched it leave. The air became clean. I felt lighter, but this still scared the shit out of me. It turned out he had been holding and fighting with me for about 2 hours. It felt like 5 minutes. As I said, I was a skeptic. I believed in ghosts, but I'd never really witnessed a possession and never would have thought it would be my own. I did my research since and have received some clarity. What I think happened is when his grandmother passed, doors were opened that we don't see, of course, and something came through and the nearest thing it inhabited was me. Hence why the family covered the mirrors so she couldn't get confused and believed the mirror was a door and trapper or something else would go in it. I also believe my boyfriend was put in my life for a reason. This might be a trigger since religion itself is a trigger. I personally believe we're more spiritual than religious because I believe there's a difference. Also, I learned that you don't have to believe in the devil for him to still know you.